man. It doesn't want to return the center. Hey, welcome back to Vortex Garage, and today we're working on a 2003 Lincoln Town Car. Now this Town Car is based on Ford's Panther chassis, which you'll find underpinning the 2003 and above Marauder, Grand Marquis, Crown Victoria, and Town Car. And one thing that sets the 2003 and above Panther cars apart from some of the older ones is that while it still retains the awesome body-on-frame construction, it also has a nice aluminum cross member with rack and pinion steering. So no more recirculating ball, old steering box stuff. So I find that these cars actually handle really nice, they drive well, they track good. That rack and pinion is just an awesome thing to have in these cars. But there is one slight problem that these cars have as they age. The steering shaft, which we have right here, gets a little bit worn out. And specifically, these U-joints, which as you can see are at a bit of a weird angle here, well, they start to bind up over time. And that'll manifest itself in some kind of tough spots in the steering, and maybe the steering not returning the center. And sometimes if it's just a little bit bad and you feel a little bit of notchiness, you can spray some lubricant on there and maybe get a couple more miles out of it. And that's actually what we did with this car when it first started happening, and went away for quite a while, but it seemed that in the colder temperatures it would return, and it was time to go ahead and order up our steering shaft and do this job. We figured we'd bring you along for the ride. Now this is a steering shaft from Ford, and the part number is 5W1Z-3B676A. Now, I bought this part from a Ford parts dealer, and this is an original OEM Ford piece. And personally, I would recommend spending the extra money for the Ford piece. This is a linkage that ties your steering together. I don't want substandard junky parts in this. Now, I don't remember the exact cost of this because I actually ordered it a little while ago, but I know it was somewhere around the $150 mark. Maybe it was $130. I'll look that up and post it here. Now I know there's cheap aftermarket versions that can be as low as $50 to $75, and that might be something that interests you. But beware, you're buying cheap substandard parts. Oftentimes, you always have to play that balance when you're playing aftermarket versus OEM parts. To me, something as critical as steering, I'm gonna pay the extra money to make sure I have this in here. And look at it this way. It's not, if you have this, it's most likely not a problem with the steering gear. It's not a problem with the power steering pump. It's not a problem with the speed adaptive power steering. It's usually just this linkage right here. So it's not all that expensive, and it's actually pretty easy to replace. So I went ahead and got the original Ford part, and that's what we're going to put in. All right, so here we are a little bit closer. We're going to pull the camera in and show you where the steering shaft is. It's actually right along here, but a couple things you might want to know before you get started. First off, we do have our car up on the lift. This has an air suspension in the back, which you're going to find on a lot of the Town Cars, the Marauders, and certain trims of the Crown Vic and Grand Marquis. If you have an air suspension in the back, you have to turn off the air suspension and the switch in the trunk before you lift the wheels off the ground. Otherwise, the thing's going to freak out and pop the springs out. So make sure you do that. Second thing, you need to brace the steering wheel because you're disconnecting the steering shaft. And if you have the steering column or intermediate shaft spin while everything's disconnected, you can cause damage to your clock spring that runs your airbag and stuff like that. So what we did, we went ahead and braced the steering wheel. We had a steering wheel brace from a cheap alignment kit that we have. I did put some hose ends on the grippers because we got a wood rim steering wheel, and we made sure it was nice and tight. So we should be good to go there. So we have our shaft here. It pretty much goes down in here next to the exhaust manifold. So you're going to want to do this on a cold engine. Or unless it's cold out, just warm it up a little bit, just so you get a little bit of heat. But you don't want to be burning yourself on it. Basically kind of goes in like this. We're going to remove the two pinch bolts. Now another piece of consideration, as you can see, we've got our service manual up here. The service manual does call out that as you remove those pinch bolts, they need to be replaced. That's something that's pretty important. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The lower steering shaft goes between the steering rack and the intermediate steering shaft, which comes down from the firewall. The lower shaft wraps around the driver's side exhaust manifold, and you'll find two pinch bolts, one on the bottom and one towards the top of the shaft. Now we'll start our job by removing the pinch bolt on the top, which fortunately is pretty easy to access. So the good news is with our wheel straight, this bolt, pinch bolt right here on the top of our lower shaft. So this is the lower shaft right here, and this is the intermediate upper shaft. So this bolt right here, which is a 13 millimeter, is nice and easy to access. And we can go ahead and get that loosened. I can tell by taking this out that probably one of the reasons they replaced these bolts is that they're pre-assembled from the factory with sealant, thread locker on them. So a lot of times you get the new bolt because it comes pre-applied with thread sealant, or thread locker, my apologies. Thread locker, not sealant. Two different things. So as you can see, I'm just using a ratchet with a long extension, and I put a wobble extension on it, and nice and easy to get in there and get that bolt off. There's our bolt. Now we're zoomed in on the front of our steering shaft, and it looks like our pinch bolt is kind of in the forward part of the car under the exhaust manifold. This one looks like it's going to be a little bit more tricky to get a ratchet on. So I'm just going to play around with that. So if I put this here, yeah, that's what I'm looking at. Let's see what we got. I'm just going to take my same wobble and long extensions and just sort of play with it and see what do I get if I try to come in here. Well, I end up hitting the valve cover. But if I go with a shorter extension, so just this bottom wobble extension, look at how rusty that heat shield is. That's very common on these. Oh, dropped my flashlight. Let me get my flashlight for you. All right, so we used a couple of long extensions and a universal joint. We were able to go ahead and get on there pretty good. Let me zoom in, hopefully. Going to show you our setup down there. Our light's not the best still. I'm having trouble getting you. There, that's something. So we're going to go ahead and work on removing that. Again, make sure that your steering wheel is nice and tight. This is actually a 10 millimeter bolt, so this one it comes off a little easier. Oh, sweet. And once we got it, it's coming loose pretty simple. Big thing I'm kind of being careful of too is I don't want to ruin that heat shield. I really don't want to have to replace it, even though it's already kind of rusty. All right, let's go ahead and get this bolt out. Now another way to do this, to get more room, I looked at a couple different ways. I put the car up on the lift. The frame's kind of in the way to come from behind. It's hard to get a ratchet from the top without using a long extension. The only option you might have, and I just didn't want to mess with it, was taking the oil filter off. And I came close to doing that, but I just had enough extensions in this universal. It got me what I needed. Now, whether or not that causes me a problem when I go to torque it later, we'll see. All right, of course we fell off there, but I think we're pretty good shot. Reach down and pull that out. There is our bolt. All right, so we're at the front of the car, kind of looking in. This is our steering rack right up here. This is one of the fluid lines to the steering rack. And then up there, in focus, you can see our steering shaft that we're going to remove. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull down straight down on it, and that'll release the lower shaft from the upper shaft there, and then we can go ahead and pop it off of the rack itself. Now, I might be getting in your way when I do this. I'm not sure. We will see. Try not to. I will certainly attempt. What I can probably do is just come up this way and do it. Yep. So I can come up from behind the cross member. All right, and I popped out from the top there. And then without turning anything, and making sure this is out of the way, I can release this, and it might be tight, so we might have to wiggle it a bit. If we need to, we might need to get in there and kind of help it off. It's almost coming. There we go. Make sure we're not hitting our heat shield. There, we got it out of the way. We should be able to pop this off now. And there we go. Now the nice thing about these, they have indents and indexing for how they attach. So you don't necessarily have to mark it when you take it off. As long as you're not moving anything, it should be pretty easy to line everything back up. Like we did on, we're gonna kind of reverse what we did. We're gonna do the rack side first, and then we'll get the intermediate side on next. That way, if we inadvertently turn the wheels at the rack, not a big deal. We can use that to line up without turning our steering column and messing up our clock spring. All right, so I'm using a new camera today, so hopefully this comes out all right. I went ahead and cranked the ISO up to get a little more light. So what I'm zoomed in on is the rack side connection for the new steering shaft. We're gonna go ahead and put that in. So I'll go up under the car, where it's a little easier for you all to see, and we'll feed the new shaft up. And we'll go ahead and put it on. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and turn this back because we know we need to line our bolt up. Went kind of like that. And then we should be able to get ready to put our new shaft at the top. So now that we've got the lower piece on, now remember the reason we did that is if we need to rotate it here, we can do that without, all we're doing is moving the rack. We're not moving the steering column shaft, which we don't want to move. So you've got where your bolt goes through here, you've got the corresponding piece here, so you can kind of get them half lined up and ready when you're putting it in. And then you can kind of go ahead and just turn it as you need to, get it lined up, and it should slide together. Should being the operative word, you just gotta get it just right. There we go. There, just like that, we got to fit it in. So a little bit of finagling. Always got to finagle stuff a little bit, you know. And we can push this back down, and then we'll go ahead and get our bolts in, and that'll lock everything in place, and then all we got to do is torque our bolts. Again, making sure that we don't turn our steering column shaft. All right, now our smaller one is 22 pound-feet. So we're going to go ahead and tighten that and torque it. Now, the big thing you want to do using all these extensions, it's going to add some torque. So you want to make sure also you're not binding on anything and that you're going in nice and smooth. So I'm in a spot where I can see it. I know you can't see it on camera, but I'll try to zoom in as I'm going. Let me see if All right, we're tightening. And that is our 22 foot-pounds. All right, now the bolt for our the upper bolt of our lower steering shaft is 35 pound-feet. So much the same, making sure we're not moving our steering shaft. We're going to go ahead and tighten it down. There we go, we're starting to tighten up. There we go. Easy as that. All right, and just like that, we're all wrapped up replacing the lower steering shaft on our 2003 Lincoln Town Car here. It's a pretty similar process on any Panther vehicle, though I would expect the Marauders might be slightly difficult because they have the bigger 32-valve 4.6-liter engine in them. Might be a little bit of different clearance issues there and how those are set up. But all the other cars should be pretty similar to this because they use the same engine and pretty much the same configuration. All right, so here's what we can report. So we went ahead and put on our lower steering shaft, and as soon as we pulled the car out, we still felt some binding in the steering. It was markedly improved. I'd say at least 2/3 better. So pulled the car back in, took a look, and honestly what I really should have done is ordered the upper shaft as well and done both, because the upper shaft, although it's a lot less complicated, does have a U-joint on the bottom, which you kind of saw on video there when we attached the lower shaft to it. Would have been nice to go ahead and replace that. So what I did in the meantime, well, because we're gonna have to order parts to do that, I went ahead and just lubricated that U-joint, and it's perfect. Steering's back to normal. So what I can tell you is that our lower arm was binding, the lower shaft was binding, and that took care of the bulk of the binding in the steering we were seeing, but it wasn't perfect until I lubricated that top U-joint. So lesson learned. And maybe when I get that part and we do it, we'll do a video and do a follow-up for this. But what I would recommend is go ahead and get that upper piece while you're at it, unless you know for certain that it's only your lower one. In the meantime, I think we're good to go for today. We'll end the video with just doing the lower one, but we'll share that insight to you after we did it. So hopefully you found that valuable. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Of course, we'll have more here for you on Vortex Garage.